Welcome to the All Out Leadership Podcast, hosted by Pastor Eric Lawson, where each episode is uniquely designed to help you live all out by bringing you practical leadership from a biblical perspective delivered in 10 minutes or less. So whether you're a business leader, serving in ministry, or simply looking to grow in your leadership, this podcast is for you. Before we dive into this week's topic, make sure to subscribe to the podcast and download the show notes at ericlawson.com/podcast. And while you're at it, feel free to share the content on social media. Now, let's join Pastor Eric for this week's conversation.
Today I want to talk about getting the facts. Getting the facts. So we just heard the story over the last several podcasts of Amnon violating his half-sister Tamar, and then Absalom. Resentment grew over a 2-year period of time. Absalom conspires to kill his brother Amnon. He succeeds in that, and this is the part that we pick up with 2 Samuel 13, verse 29. So the servants of Absalom did to Amnon as Absalom had commanded, and that was they killed him. Then all the king's sons arose. They were at this party together where Amnon was killed, and each one got on his mule and fled. And it came to pass, while they were on the way, that the news came to David, saying, Absalom has killed all the king's sons. Not one of them is left. And so the king arose, tore his garment, lay on the ground. Now, this is something that happens every single day in my life as a leader, and that is I hear a story that is only half the story, and that wasn't an accurate half at that. And so, unfortunately, I have learned or am learning many times the hard way that the first time I hear something, it might not be completely accurate. And as a leader, before we act, so here we see David react. He arose, tore his garments, lay on the ground. He didn't get the rest of the story. And we see the emotional ramifications and the consequence and this emotional spiral downhill because David was told, all your sons have died. Well, no, not all of them, just one. Now, as horrible as that is, it's very different than all of them. And so he didn't get the whole story. How many times in your life have you reacted because you heard somebody come to you that said so-and-so said something about you, and then you react, you get mad, you take up an offense, you go, well, I can't believe they said that. You get out your social media and you make some kind of post. You don't even know the facts. You don't even have the whole story. How many times does that happen inside of a business context that you hear about an employee or one of your team members and they did such and such, and, oh, I can't believe they did that. Well, are you sure they did that? You're just hearing one side of the story. In fact, Proverbs says this, Proverbs 18, verse 17. The first one to plead his cause seems right until his neighbor comes and examines him. So many times when I go get the rest of the story, I find out a whole lot of the details that put the first story into perspective and context, and it completely changes what I thought. And so a wise leader will take time before you react, before you make a bunch of decisions, before you create new policies, before you fire somebody, before you have an all-staff meeting, get the facts. Now, 2 Samuel 13, verse 32. Then Jonadab, the son of Shimea, David's brother, answered and said, Let not my lord suppose they have killed all the young men, the king's sons, for only Amnon is dead. Now, fortunately, David was a wise leader, and he had a culture and an environment where people could speak up and not fear consequences. And so he gets the rest of the story, and it does change how David feels when he gets the rest of the facts. So are you a leader where people can come to you and be honest and be vulnerable and go, hey, I'm feeling this, or hey, such and such happened here? And are you a leader that follows up and gets the rest of the story? Hey, I heard such and such, and I'm just lacking some clarity here. Could you give me your side of the story? Could you tell me from your perspective what happened? And then just listen, not get defensive, and get all the facts. Years ago, I was on a great church staff, and every leader has flaws. Okay, we're all works in progress. We're all trophies of God's grace. And so I was in this particular organization, and I was leading a department, and one of my staff members' names came up from someone else inside of that room, and they had said something negative about this particular person who was on my team. And I didn't know about it. And it looked bad the way it was spun, because it actually was spun, because unfortunately people do that. And so they had spun it a particular way. Well, the boss had said, well, da. And he goes, you know what, Eric, you need to fire that person. And now, based on how the story was spun, it did look bad. Now, it wasn't an immoral failure. There wasn't some major thing. But how that story was spun, it really made that staff member look bad. So I just said, could I dig into that? Because that does not sound like that particular staff member. I don't know that that's all the story. And this particular leader had gotten really offended by what that they had heard, because this particular person who spun the story knew that leader's buttons and consciously or unconsciously hit the right button, and that leader kind of went down his path. And so I had to go fire a staff member who I didn't know had actually, or thought actually didn't do anything wrong. So I went to that particular staff person. I go, hey, here's what was said. Tell me the other side of the story. And so they told me the other side of the story. Now, sure enough, it was not what it was presented to be. So I say, hey, I'm incredibly sorry, but this is the results. This is what happened. Look, you know what? Just take a couple of days off. All right. Now we're gonna trust God. We're gonna pray. You just take a couple of days off, and God's gonna work this out for you. Now I'm firing you, but I'm not. It's going to work out. Just trust me. Okay. I'm in a really awkward situation here because I got to obey my boss, but God's going to vindicate this. So just trust me. And you go, oh, okay. So gave him 2 days off. Technically he was fired. Then sure enough, the opportunity to present the other side of the story presented itself. There was some other information that was presented to that leader that clarified everything. And then after that, it was, yeah, you know what? Let's bring that guy back on the team. And I go, that's a good idea. So I went right back and said, hey, now here's what I respect about the particular leader that was upset and asked me to dismiss that staff person. They had the ability to admit they were wrong. Not every leader can do that. And unfortunately, I've had to do that far more times than I've really wanted to, and I'll probably have to do that for the rest of my life till I die. But a wise leader can admit their mistakes, their flaws, and secondly, they'll own it, and then they'll fix it. And that's what happened in this situation. And again, I have tremendous respect for this particular leader that I worked for. This was just a flaw, a little bit of a mistake inside of their leadership. And again, hey, we all have our issues. I got mine. But they've grown tremendously, and I'm a work in progress too. So look, before you get mad, before you fire somebody, before you hit send on that text, that tweet, get the facts, get the rest of the story, and you will be glad you did.
Thank you for joining us on the All Out Leadership Podcast. We hope you gained new biblical insight that challenged you to grow in your leadership. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, we would love your help in getting the content out farther. You can help by subscribing to the podcast at ericlawson.com/podcast and telling others about it. Next week, Pastor Eric will be back with another episode. So until then, we hope you have a great week being an all-out leader.